Colourful, quirky, and completely chaotic, Above Land Rhapsody takes the 3-player co-op carnage of Elden Ring Nightreign and injects it with some hilariously over-the-top weapons and special moves that seem straight out of a Yakuza street brawl. At a recent BiliBili First Look event in Shanghai, I spent a few hours hacking and slashing away at monsters in a land above the clouds, in this frenetic roguelite that marries breathtaking bursts of action and exploration with a deep sense of combat customization. What really stood out for me was the creative combination of weaponry at my disposal. I mean, when was the last time you played an action RPG that allowed you to cut down goblins with a giant broadsword in one hand and perform slam-dunking special moves with a basketball dribbled with the other? Just why do you have access to an eclectic arsenal of weapons that seem to be stripped out of the pages of a teenager's sketchbook? Well, that probably has something to do with the fact that in Above Land Rhapsody you actually play as a young child, at least outside of each battle. Here your downtime is spent wandering through the bowels of an interdimensional ship, trading for special potions with the alchemist, preparing meals with a chef that provide buffs during combat, and visiting the tailor to unlock various cosmetic upgrades like witches' hats and aviation goggles for your avatar. The most important NPC to befriend though is the blacksmith, who provides you with a weapon set that combines a standard suite of high fantasy armaments with what appears to be the most wanted items on a grade schooler's Christmas list. Of course there are swords, dual-wielded daggers, and a powerful bow to deal damage with, but there's also a yo-yo, electric guitar, and the previously mentioned basketball to add some slapstick to every monster ass you kick. I'm assuming the team at Developer Flying Amateurs are WWE fans too, since you can even choose to wield a folding chair exactly like the kind typically clattered over the skulls of greased up grapplers ringside at WrestleMania. You might say that the developers have employed an everything but the kitchen sink approach to designing your character's arsenal. But since in the early version I played there was only 12 out of the more than 30 weapons set to be available in the finished game, I can't rule out the possibility that there might actually be a kitchen sink or some other random piece of plumbing to wield when Above Land Rhapsody eventually comes out. It's pretty nuts. Once you're good to go, you then shift through the pages of an intricate pop-up book left to the child by his missing mother, which then teleports you into a battle realm composed of floating chunks of scattered landscape and populated with hordes of minions to clash with and countless secret treasures to scour for. In this dimension, you transform into a lithe warrior and, either solo or with up to 2 companions in tow, must survive 4 waves of increasingly challenging enemy hordes, before overcoming an end boss in a gameplay session that basically constitutes about 30 breathless minutes of mayhem. Each wave of enemies you dispatch drops randomized character modifiers that you can equip on the fly, ranging from simply electrifying your weapons, to a buff that makes the size of your character slowly grow and become more powerful at the cost of your overall movement speed. Apparently in the full game there will be even more absurd modifiers that turn enemies into sheep, or allow you to literally shout your enemies to death using a headset microphone. Finally, a gameplay mechanic purpose-built for every shrieking adolescent I've ever encountered in Call of Duty. Even without the novel gameplay twists introduced by these modifiers, which I'm told will be close to a staggering 1,000 in number, the weapons are already an absolute blast to use. In addition to standard attacks, each weapon also has 2 special skills that operate on a cooldown timer. For example, the broadsword can deploy an automated turret to help thin enemy numbers in your vicinity, while the folding chair can summon a wrestling ring to rope in the enemies around you and prevent them from dodging your chair swinging attacks. Each weapon also features its own unique combat mechanics. With the Soulbreaker hammer, I was simply alternating between the 2 main attack buttons to pull off heavy overhead swings and charged up ground pounds. But with the electric guitar, I fell into a completely different rhythm. Quite literally so, since wielding the axe of the fretted kind brings up a tempo indicator at the bottom of the screen. The better you time each strum of the guitar, the more damage you deal with the musical note projectiles that fire out in all directions, as your character knee slides and duck walks around the combat arena like an action role-playing Angus Young. I must admit that the manic nature of Aboveland Rhapsody's scraps meant that I didn't always completely know what was going on, but I was nothing if not entertained at all times. It's worth pointing out that the actual multiplayer component of Aboveland Rhapsody is still very much a work in progress, and many of the features planned for cooperative play were not present in the early build I played. Specifically, the full game is set to allow players to trade items like ability modifiers between them, but perhaps more enticingly, your combat abilities will be far more complementary in a scrap. An example suggested to me by one of the developers was that if two players each had the basketball equipped, they might be able to pass it back and forth in quick succession in order to create a powerful whirlwind to damage enemies with, before finishing them off with one player lobbing the ball to the other for an alley-oop dunk on the enemy's head. To be clear, these concepts are only tentative at this stage, but I'm certainly keen to see what kind of tandem takedowns will end up in Aboveland Rhapsody when it launches. Perhaps you could have a trio of guitarists shredding a harmony solo to literally melt enemy faces with, or perhaps multiple yo-yo wielders could spin up a web of strings and really rock the cradle with pounding pendulum style attacks. There's certainly scope for some really fun combinations here. At this early stage in its development, Aboveland Rhapsody is also in desperate need of better onboarding for new players. Although its combat is extremely easy to pick up due to its simple and instantly rewarding design, there are an overwhelming number of systems to interact with during each battle. These include various statues littered around the arena that grant increases to your maximum health or elemental defense, with some requiring the offering of special keys you collect during battle, some with short puzzles to solve, and others demanding the use of another consumable called a G-Stone. There's also the Wobbo, which sounds like an Australian nickname, but it's actually a companion creature that can either function as an autonomous bodyguard, or even allow the player to transform into a powerful monster for short periods of time. Needless to say, it was quite a lot to process in between the constant hacking and slashing of hordes. But the developers assure me that they're working on an expanded tutorial for the full game that will go beyond the basic introduction included in this preview build. If developer flying amateurs can knuckle down and get the basics sorted, then that should really allow the silly side of Aboveland Rhapsody to really shine. This is an action RPG overflowing with energy and playfulness, and I'm certainly keen to see more. With no release window confirmed at this time, it could still be quite a while before we get the finished game in our hands. And it's hard to tell from this short slice just how much story substance will be evident, and what other combat arenas will be included to keep the fighting fresh. But for now, I can say that the potential for Aboveland Rhapsody is certainly sky high. For more previews of upcoming games, check out our hands-ons with Karma Exorcist and Hell Let Loose Vietnam. And for everything else, stick with IGN.